We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move this House do now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful of this opportunity on the adjournment debate to bring the case of Beth Schlesinger to the attention of the House, and indeed, hopefully, beyond this House, to the whole country. Because I believe that the injustice that has happened to Beth Schlesinger deserves a wider audience and wider understanding than has been the case so far. Although it is already a case that has attracted international attention, if my inbox is anything to go by, because I have had emails from the United States, from Italy, from Israel, as well as from Austria, thanking me for bringing the case of Beth Schlesinger to this House's attention. The only way to describe this case, Mr. Speaker, is Kafkaesque. It's an overused word sometimes in debate, but what has happened to Beth Schlesinger belies normal understanding. Authorities have taken decisions about her life and her children's life which are inexplicable and certainly unjust. And on the 15th of February 2010, Mr. Schlesinger tried to have Beth committed to a mental hospital in Austria. Mr. Schlesinger requested that a friend of his, Constance Thau, who was a High Court judge in Austria, Mr. Schlesinger requested that a friend of his, Constance Thau, who was a High Court judge in Austria, contact Susan Gottlicher, who was the judge in charge of the case. After this meeting between the judge, a highly irregular occurrence for a High Court judge to intervene in another court on behalf of a father who'd shown himself to be violent, Beth's custody rights were reduced, and the judge ordered that the children were not to leave Austria. A Dr. Ulrich Willinger then produced a psychiatric report on Beth, where she recommended, without fully examining all the people involved in it, that the children were returned to Mr. Schlesinger's control. That report was considered by the judge on June the 17th, 2011. Crucially, the higher court asked for a further investigation and that reports be drawn up on the children, the father and the mother. This instruction by the higher court was never carried out. He was asked to basically tell the mother what the children's needs were and what was happening. Instead, what actually happened was that he cancelled 50 of Beth's visits. Rather than him looking after the children, Filipino nannies were hired to look after the children for 12 hours a day at weekend and to take them to and from the nursery. Beth became more and more worried about the children. Samuel had 4 teeth taken out without any medical reasons given. Benjamin had 2 teeth removed. Beth was not only worried about what was happening as the visits were cancelled and the children were upset, it also became clear that in the previous decision of the court that Judge Gottlicher had suppressed a report from the nursery which had shown and expressed the view that when the children were seeing the father, that they had been crying and screaming and had been extremely distressed. It is quite clear that Judge Gottlicher had that report and it wasn't used. Things went from bad to worse, not just in terms of access to the children, but in terms of financing. Mr. Schlesinger stopped paying maintenance and indeed tried to demand that Beth paid maintenance. She was now only given access to 2 afternoons a week and 3 hours every second Sunday. An extraordinary turnaround from the original situation. In July 2013, the judge awarded full custody to the father. And at this time, and this is absolutely crucial, Mr. Speaker, no assessment of the father, no assessment of the father with the children had taken place. The psychiatrist's report that had recommended against Beth, she had been examined in German, which she is not fluent in, and so her answers had been slow, and that was counted as a mark towards her being mentally unstable. It also became clear that the relationship between Judge Constance, not only with Mr. Schlesinger, but her husband worked in the same hospital as Dr. Villinger. I am not a person who believes in conspiracies, usually, Mr. Speaker, but I think in this case, the decisions that were taken were so strange, one has to suspect that undue influence and conspiracy were taking place.
Because I want to put formally on the record my thanks to the member for Blackley and Broughton for bringing this case, and indeed on behalf of my own constituent Adrian Alexander, who indeed is the brother of Beth Schlesinger. Adrian and I had cause to visit the ambassador, the Austrian embassy, and we discussed the case with him. And I have to say, I came away with a feeling that even the ambassador was confused about some of the case, particularly in regard to the recent judgment where there's been no recitation of the facts of the case, so we don't even know what we're dealing with. And if we could at least establish that, I think then we could seek some kind of resolution.
The honourable member given way. This is a case which has caused considerable concern amongst my constituents. At the start of his very fine comments, he commented about the Austrian judicial system following the rules of natural justice. But is he aware that actually in the judgments handed down by the judges, there actually has been no explanation as to why Mr. Schlesinger is favoured over Mrs. They simply issued a judgment with no explanation, and that surely cannot be in line with natural justice.
I think, Mr. Speaker, we should begin by saying the only thing that matters is the best interest of the children, Benji and Sammy Schlesinger. After 2.5 years in the care of their father, they are suffering from seriously impaired development and appear traumatised. The decision to award custody to the father, Dr. Schlesinger, is one of the worst miscarriages of justice I've ever experienced during my long period as an elected representative. Beth Schlesinger, falsely and cruelly labelled mentally ill and an unfit mother, labels both disproved by independent professionals. A mother, by the way, who is still allowed unsupervised access to her children. If this woman was an unfit mother and suffered from serious mental health problems, the norm would surely be supervised access at the very least. A father, as my honourable friend has said, whose documented history of abusive behaviour has not even been considered by the relevant court. A senior Austrian judge, Constance Tau, a friend of the father's family, who sought to influence the judge hearing the case on behalf of the father. That one of the children has been referred for professional help because that child is self-harming at such a tender age, and despite the fact that child protection agencies have been called to the father's home following reports of children crying endlessly in an unusual way in distress. Despite all of that, the court made a final decision with one word. That one word, refused, i.e. the appeal in this context. But there is absolutely no question there are serious issues to be addressed in relation to a flawed process, and as my honourable friend said, I would go even further, in relation to corruption. Now, the Austrian justice system is not renowned for corruption. It is viewed to be a modern, a transparent justice system. But in this case, there are so many questions to answer. I think it is entirely appropriate for the UK government to ask the Justice Ministry to look at the case in all of its elements and to reopen the case as a matter of urgency.
It will be very clear, Mr. Speaker, to the House this evening that from what the honourable gentleman opposite has said, that he and Ms Schlesinger have deep concerns about the integrity of the legal process that has taken place in Austria, and believe too that some of the information and the evidence presented to the Austrian courts may have been seriously flawed. While the Foreign and Commonwealth Office cannot become involved in the competent judicial process of another country, if Mrs Schlesinger's legal team were to approach us with significant and substantiated, and I stress that word, concerns about the process that had been involved in this case, we would certainly be prepared to consider such representations and consider raising them with the Austrian authorities. Now, I have to be clear, Mr. Speaker, that we can only intervene if there are sufficient grounds, particularly substantiated grounds about the process involved, and we cannot simply take sides regarding the custody of the children, any more than government ministers can take sides in such a dispute being handled by the courts here in the United Kingdom. And if her lawyers advise that there are grounds for diplomatic intervention that might be of benefit and which could be substantiated by sufficient evidence, then the legal team and or the honourable gentlemen are welcome to come and put their representations to us again.
Order. Order.